Do you want to hear about my labs or just my story in general, or where do you want to go?
I guess whatever would pertain more to the topic of this technology and the consciousness transfer. So,
Okay, the technology. So when I was in the middle of realizing that I was being abducted by aliens, and I call them aliens just because it's an easy term and something that people are familiar with. A lot of times, even my own posts, I put that word in quotes because I'm not convinced that they are actually extraterrestrials from outer space. Although I don't leave that off the table. You know, it's entirely possible there's life on other planets, but I happen to think that these creatures are actually from right here on our planet. So it took me quite some time to very reluctantly, by the way, come to the understanding, realization, and even having to admit to myself what was happening. That took me quite some time. And then while I was in the middle of trying to figure that whole scene out, I started realizing that the aliens were transferring my consciousness. That's the first thing I realized. And that's when I started understanding that I don't think these are actually aliens from outer space. Why are they interested in these soul transfers? At that time, they seemed to be trying to reverse engineer the soul to create a soul. I couldn't quite wrap my mind around exactly what they were doing, but whatever it is told me these are not aliens from outer space. This is not, what they're trying to present themselves as is not at all what I come to believe that they are. So while I was in the middle of that, and I actually experienced a couple of very traumatic incidents with that were Milabs incidents. And so there were several months during this period where I was trying to pay a lot of attention and trying to separate my experiences, trying to figure out who has me, what do they want, what are they doing, exactly what's happening here, instead of just taking things at face value. And it took a lot of different experiences to try to come to an understanding of what was going on. When I realized that there were I was coming across these reptilian creatures, and these reptilian creatures did not fall into any category that I had ever heard before. So to try to make it a little short, I was having hundreds of experiences with the phenomenon, different aspects of the phenomenon. In about March or April, ended up coming to the community known as UFO Twitter. And that's where I started coming across other people, other abductees, other experiencers, other people who were having Milabs. So when I came across this community and I was trying to put my own pieces together at that time, I knew that there was something very different happening. And I was involved with these creatures that people call reptilian creatures. They were very reptilian looking, but they had a reddish, pinkish color skin to them. And this was something I had not come across at all. When I came to the community, I started talking to experiencers, abductees. I was asking a lot of questions. I was the only one that I could find who was seeing these reddish, reptilian looking creatures. These creatures were referring to me by a number. And so this was very different than just your average everyday alien experience. These creatures were non-human, but at the same time, they were using human constructs, like calling me by a number. So I knew this was different. I knew this was unusual. I knew it was not quite part of the alien experience, although there was a lot of overlap. So I was trying to ask everyone I could find, all the abductees. I had a partner doing spaces together. She was a Milabs abductee. She remembers the program she was in. She remembers being recruited. She remembers everything there was to remember as a child, a lot of it. I did not have that. And so I was just asking everybody I could find, hey, is anyone else being called by a number? So this is not making any sense to me. To make it a bit of a shorter story, I did end up coming across a woman by the name of Penny Shepard. I'm not sure if you guys have had her on the podcast. I spoke about this on the confessionals.
right.
So through an interesting series of events, I come across a Penny Shepard, and I go to her website and I start reading her story. And the very first thing that hits me is that she is called number 11. Now, Penny Shepard claims to be number 11 in Stranger Things. So go ahead, Aaron. Were you?
No, no. It's funny you said that. the first thing I thought of when you said number was 11 in Stranger Things, and then you just said it. So there you go. That's
Yeah.
confirmation.
So I'm seeing these reddish, pinkish, reptilian looking entities. I had never seen Stranger Things at the time. I still actually have not seen it, but I'm seeing these red reptilian entities. They're calling me by a number. And at some point, I was scrolling through Twitter probably, and I came across an advertisement for Stranger Things. And as soon as I saw the skin of that creature, my heart stopped. I thought, oh my gosh, that's it. That's what I'm seeing. It's a really crepey looking reddish pinkish skin. Sometimes it almost looks like it's burned, like a Freddy Krueger type skin, but those little round circles, like a reptilian creature. So I came across that as well. I can't remember at what point that was. I had told my husband, they're calling me by this number. My husband says to me, well, that's the date you were born, that number, 18. And I thought that was ridiculous. It's like, there's no possible way these things are calling me by the number of the day I was born, because they would run out of numbers fairly quickly. That would not be probably a wise move. So I discounted that. So imagine I come across Penny Shepherd's website. I see that she's claiming to be number 11 on Stranger Things. And the first thing I see is she's called by 11. And then she actually writes a paragraph on how 11 is the day of her birth. And so now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I finally have some kind of a lead on what in the world is happening to me, because up until this point, I had zero, I had nothing. So I read her story. She has ties to the Montauk Project. She believes she does. She believes that Stranger Things was actually based on her own life story. And so I just read through her website and I start seeing some similarities. Now, I don't want to overstate the similarities, because I have that I'm aware of, any involvement in Hollywood, or even if you hear Nathan Reynolds talk, we have some similar parts of our story, but nothing to that extent. I don't have satanic ritual abuse that I'm aware of, and a lot of the things that now I've come across Nathan Reynolds as well.
Yeah,
And there's some similarities.
his testimony is fantastic, by the way.
It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It's very
so
powerful. Yeah.
I'm watching, I'm listening, I'm reading her website, and I'm just going, oh my gosh, this is the closest thing I have ever come across that explains what's happening to me. In the meanwhile, and I think it was actually first that I came across Elisa and her testimony on your website regarding this soul transfer technology with the non-human intelligence, how they take us out of REM sleep, put us into other bodies, and then there's a whole other life going on behind the scenes. She references Donald Marshall during that interview. Now, I am not in that position either, Donald Marshall's position, thank heaven. So I come across Penny Shepherd. The short story is I end up getting Penny Shepherd on the phone. So she agrees to talk to me. She's actually an open book. And Penny starts asking me several questions about my family, my bloodlines, and she starts mentioning people like Max Spears, that I need to look him up. She starts mentioning different projects. And I said this on the confessionals. This is nothing against Penny at all. Penny is probably, or could still be, I just want to leave it on the table that she could still be an asset, right? All of us could still be. Any of us who are in any of these programs could actually still be gathering information, even if we're not aware of it.
Right.
So I'm trying to take what she's saying with a grain of salt. I'm just trying to absorb the information, because it's matching very, very closely, which is sometimes a red flag, right? So I got to the part where she asked me, do you have a gap in your teeth? And this is where, again, my heart just stopped, because I do have a gap in my teeth. I was born with a gap in my teeth. It was repaired when I was maybe 10 years old. I don't know how she could possibly have that information. So this was a piece of information she came up with that I really, just reached in my own mind. Where could this have come from? Is there a picture of me somewhere? Where could she have gotten this information? Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? No. So she asked me if I have a gap in my teeth, and she asked me if I had any of the following family names. And I looked for my notes this morning. I could not find them. I don't have all of the family names. I just have the name that stood out to me because it was in my family name. And I prefer not to give that name on air right now. So she tells me, do you have these family names? And it was 4 or 5 names that she came up with. One of them is one of my family names. And so then she starts telling me that the Nazis were doing these genetic experiments with Mengele, and that he was actually mixing his genetics and his DNA into Milabs abductees, into, women possibly who were related to the military industrial complex and things like that. And so she then explains that because of this gap in my teeth and this family name that I have, I'm very likely somehow under this umbrella of being related to these projects related to Mengele. And this was the first time that I was then able to just kind of put this picture together of what was happening to me. It was very interesting to come across actually 2 different people. I had Elisa talking about the Donna Marshall stuff, and then I had Penny Shepard, and she was saying things about me that I don't think she could possibly have known without some assistance, at least. So that's when I very first just wrapped my mind around what was going on. It was very, very difficult for me to accept. I felt very betrayed. It was one thing for me to understand, okay, there's these creatures, we call them aliens, and they're taking me out of my bed at night, most of the time at night, sometimes not. And there's also this other thing going on, which also involved non-human creatures, but had a very, very human element to it, which was calling me by a number. And so I felt very betrayed by the human race. I felt betrayed by the military industrial complex, by these private corporations. These private corporations have quite possibly even outpaced our own military industrial complex, our own government agencies with this technology.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, it was just a complete betrayal, but it was also healing for me to understand, okay, this is happening to other people. It's not just me. I know it sounds absolutely insane, but it's happening to other people. And so that's also actually very healing and comforting to come across other people who are talking about this and willing to talk about it. So I'll end it there. Hopefully I answered that question because I didn't write it down.
Yeah, no, it was great. And yeah, I mean, obviously coming forward and talking about it, that's why we do this. So other people can feel, better about coming forward, feel safe coming forward. So everything you mentioned, I absolutely, we both understand is the reality on this planet. It's not a conspiracy theory. I've had my own experiences, so I can confidently speak about it as like, no, I know, like I don't have to be a skeptic about it when I ask you questions because we know it's real. So I like to take it a step further, and maybe you can tell us what you actually, do you remember any specific missions or anything that you were tasked with doing when you were pulled out of your REM state in another body? And, what did one of those missions look like?
So they're actually different. A lot of times they're different. I actually have an entire journal sitting right next to me where I write down everything that I can possibly remember. Something I suggest to other people, if you want to know what's going on and you suspect that you might be involved in one of these programs, start writing down. Write down your dreams because it can feel like a dream sometimes. So I get sent on, I've never been in that I'm aware of any of these 20 and back programs or going to other planets. That has not been my experience in my conscious recollection. What I am doing is it seems like I'm being transferred into other bodies and then I'm going on these missions. Now, these missions usually entail I've smuggled something in across the border. It seemed to be the border to me. I have snuck a firearm into a wedding past another non-human intelligence. And I've also eliminated several targets. So one thing I want to say, especially when I say something like eliminating targets, I do want to throw out there that I entertain the possibility that this is actually training, possibly training. and not actual real life missions. And I don't want to contradict anyone else who believes otherwise, because that might not be the program that I'm in. I could be something separate. I don't want to take away the reality of these programs and these missions and these experiences. But I've had so many now that I do think that there's an element of training to it. So I think I sometimes wonder, does this go hand in hand with the David Jacobs stuff, where we have abductees actually being trained for a future where these so-called aliens are actually living among us more openly, and abductees are actually having to move about in these environments. I have been trained how to conceal my own thoughts from them. And so, what is that? The time I snuck a pistol into a wedding, I mean, it just sounds ludicrous. It doesn't sound like a real life situation. But yet I had to sneak this weapon past a non-human intelligence guard and get it into the wedding. And so I'm now really thinking that a lot of this is training scenarios. What that training is for is a whole other question.
Right. I mean, it's absolutely possible. And training can be looked at on so many different levels too. Training for what you described, training for even your soul, you, in this 3D reality, as far as understanding that all this exists and how you can like adapt and overcome and like, I guess, better prepare yourself and better guard yourself from this happening in the future, right? And it's like you learn how to put on your armor and build that the fortification around yourself. I've had very similar. It's very similar. Like they're not off planet stuff, but I've been sent on missions. One time I was sent into this like elitist Hollywood party, and I was tasked with identifying a very specific entity that was hiding in one of the humans, right? And they were like, "Come on, we're paying you to do this," and whatever. And I was like, "Whatever." I didn't know, but I ended up identifying them, and they were done with me, and then I woke back up. But another time we were going into this bank. It was like more like kind of like a heist, and we had to we were trying to get this guy to talk, and he wouldn't talk, and ended up killing him and whatever, and burning the whole building down. It was crazy, but it's very much like these type of like asset, like you're used as an asset, an assassin or whatever. So I understand. I'm only sharing this just so like I understand exactly what you're saying. But I remember you also mentioning experiencing like a jump room or a portal type of scenario as well, and maybe you can go into that.
So that was a little bit different for me. So I interpreted that as actually as an alien environment. And I'm only saying that because the shape of the room was very much rounded. So when I even documented that experience in my head, it was very much an alien experience as opposed to a Milab experience. But then I later found out that there are these things called jump rooms, which I didn't know at the time. So which one is it? I don't know. I am now of the opinion that there are so much overlap and so much connectivity and so much of them working together that I think it's going to become very difficult to even isolate a purely alien experience and a pure Milabs experience because they are just working together.
Yeah.
Again, like Elisa said, we wouldn't have this technology if it weren't for the non-human intelligence. Even if we go back to the days of the Nazis and the occult and all the downloads that they were getting to build these ships, we wouldn't have the ships without the non-human intelligence technology. Right. So this was an experience where I was in a very rounded room, a round environment, which a lot of times will suggest to me it's an alien environment. It appeared to be a gallery, almost like an art gallery. There were paintings on the wall. Now, when I looked closer at these paintings, I understood that it was actually a scene from a real life scene. And I was taught how to jump into these paintings, go into the scene, which was a completely different time period. And it was a time period that was reflected in the painting. So I would jump into the painting, and then I would immediately, it wasn't like I hung around or anything. I would immediately then jump back. And I did this 3 times while I was in this environment. It was 3 different paintings in 3 different periods. I wish I had even written down much more than I did at the time, because I had no idea there was something called a jump room. I thought the aliens were teaching me how to kind of time travel. And really, I still don't know to this day which one was it. I think a lot of times we're actually mimicking what they can do and mimicking what they're teaching us. So was it aliens? Was it a jump room? I don't know. But I now understand that there are jump rooms and other people have done this as a matter of fact, on that confessionals interview, there were comments under that interview talking about some Mario Brothers video game where the cartoon characters were jumping into paintings. So it's a thing.
That's Mario 64.
Right.
That was Mario 64. Yep.
I've played it.
So a couple people commented on that.
I forgot all about that, but that's exactly what you do in the game.
So weird.
Yes. The jump rooms are very real. And a number of people, including Max Spears, have talked about them. And, they can be anywhere. They could be in a building you walk past every day on your way to work. They could be underground in a deep underground military base. They can be natural too. And I think some of them, sometimes they're not always stationary, and maybe for the conditions are perfect at the right time, right place, the portal's open, the jump room's open, and maybe it's not. Maybe it has to be an astrological alignment. Who knows? So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, have you heard of any of the above, as far as them not being stationary or moving or natural?
I don't know. I think you probably know more about it than I do. Again, when I had that experience for myself, I didn't even know there was something called a jump room. I didn't know, that this was a thing. And so it is good. It's interesting for me, just on a personal level, I have all of these things written down. Now that's not proof for anybody else, but it's proof for me. I have all of these things written down. All of my ideas are written down. All of my experiences are written down. And then to later come across other people saying the exact same thing, it's just very validating. A lot of people would call that confirmation bias. It doesn't matter to me. To me, it says, okay, this is happening to other people. We need to keep an open mind. What is this? Why are they doing this? I know it sounds like science fiction, but yet here we are.
Right. I mean,
right.
It's just the bigger picture is they really just thought they can get away with everything without any consequences. But obviously that's turning out not to be the case. But I don't think the why, it could be any number of reasons why. There's so many different groups involved in so many organizations. Like you said, it's probably the private sector. It is the military industrial complex, but it is the private sector that is really running the show and doing these black programs. And, that's why even when you get to disclosure from the government, it's not even conversation's never going to go that direction, because we're talking about a completely different entity, even though it is all overlapping. And I do want to comment on your, you say the aliens or their aliens, whatever aliens were abducting you alongside with the military. Well, I mean, that's what we would call PLF's program life form. So it's like a very advanced cyborg, I guess you could say, an android type. So it is an extraterrestrial, but they have they're used for an abduction, and they actually have an expiration date, according to what some people say. So they'll be sent on a mission, a gray ET or whatever avatar, whatever it is that they grow up in some lab, and they program it and assign it a mission, and then it performs its mission and it dies. So when I asked that quantum physicist I was staying with, who worked 40 years in a shadow government, I said, he was talking about the underground tunnels. I said, who built them, the ETs or the government? He said, there's no difference. So they are working hand in hand. And and he explained there is an entire different benevolent side to all this, but that stuff never gets talked about, because the stuff that gets talked about is the darkness being exposed. So I know I just went on a little tangent there, but maybe if you'd like to add anything on to that before we move on.
No, your tangent is my tangent. This is cooperation. This is non-humans working with humans, separating them at this point. Like you said, I do believe that there are benevolent entities out there. I'm not convinced I would call them aliens. But as far as the negative side and the nefarious side, it's so difficult to separate now. There's almost no difference to me. And it's gotten to the point where it doesn't matter, because again, they seem to be working side by side. We now have a new whistleblower out in the UFO community, who has seen these creatures working side by side with humans. Eventually, this will come out. It's probably part of the secret of why we don't have disclosures, because we're neck deep in it. So yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Right. So, okay, let's get back into your story. So is this like the big thing for you has been unraveling your MyLab, your abductions, right? And how this has happened and meeting Penny Shepherd and all that. But what else have you experienced? Like, is there any other element to this that we haven't discussed yet?
I would say, what haven't I experienced, actually, because it's a lot. And I've never even told the entirety of my story or talked about a lot of my actual individual stories. I don't think on any podcast yet, not even in my own spaces. It's just a lot. But I do spend time trying to figure out, how did I get into this? What's the connection? How did I get onto whatever this list is, where they're able to take my consciousness out of my body and transfer it somewhere else? By the way, I was going to mention, I think that they might even be selling us on the open market, because I have had experiences working for cartels.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds insane, but since we're talking about insane things, I might as well throw that out there. I have had multiple experiences where I am on a mission for, I think, even different cartels, maybe not even the same cartel.
Yeah, that was, are you familiar with Tony Rodriguez? That's the first part of his testimony. He was taken and he worked in Peru for the cartels, the drug runs. As a child, they were using him as a psychic, essentially. He went through the remote viewing, the MK Ultra program, and they were trying to open up these children's minds so these children can be an avenue for channeling. So whenever they're making their drug runs, they can actually ask if what the weather is going to be like, if there's like an ambush waiting for them, or whatever the case may be. And he has an entire, I mean, he's written books about it, but yeah, he was taken and working for the cartels. So, yeah, that would align with what you said, and I'll let you continue.
So I had an experience with someone in the UFO Twitter community. I'll start out by saying, any person, you guys could be assets. I could be an asset. Any person we come across on Twitter might not actually be who they say they are, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll just get that out of the way immediately.
Right.
I had an experience where I found myself in someone else's body. I knew this person's essence, or the energy of who this person was. They will remain nameless, obviously. I knew the physical characteristics of the body. I could see what the body was wearing. I looked down at my feet and went, whoa, well, those feet are not mine, because they were large feet. I knew where the person was, what type of physical structure they were in, and what they were doing at that moment. Of course, I write it all down. So again, I have a perception that I'm in someone else's body. I write down all of the information. This is usually stuff I keep to myself. But two times now, I have just gone out on a limb, and I've written to the person and said, hey, what were you doing yesterday? And as it turns out, by all accounts of what we can figure out, I was actually in this person's body. I mean, it actually happened. I called the clothes that they were wearing, the size of their feet, what their body looked like, what they were in a meeting, some of the conversation that was happening, or I'm sorry, the essence of the meeting, and where this meeting took place, etc. So I was able to verify for myself I actually was in someone else's body. Separate from that, I had another incident that we don't have to get into, where I received confirmation from someone. Yep, that happened. So my question to you guys is, after speaking to Tony or any of your other guests, I have now started to wonder, is this something that I am now just doing spontaneously? Or the mere fact that I was in this person's body, was it absolutely directed either by, Milabs, NHI combination, whatever we want to call that now? Or was it directed? Or can I just now, because I've done this so many times, just entangle with someone and spontaneously end up in their body? You guys heard of anything like that?
I have, and I don't have an answer for you. I wish I did. I think everything you just listed, all the above, could be possible, but I would be lying if I told you exactly why it was happening because I don't know, unfortunately.
Yeah. So
I
I
think
just
all of the above
wonder,
happen, in my
could
opinion.
it be, I've now done this 100 times, so I'm now just on my own, going out, popping into people's bodies, or is it always directed? I would love to know that. If you guys have, future guests on, and you remember that question, throw it out there. That would be amazing to know, because then I think, okay, was I manipulated and placed into that body for some type of a confirmation, or are we being entangled for a purpose? Because it was actually a reverse as well, where that person was in my house and explained things that there's no way they could have gotten off of any type of, real estate listing or photograph or, that kind of a thing. It was definitely information that was extraordinary information.
Well, I mean, the term I was hearing psychic spy when you said that, and I'm wondering if like, okay, what would be better than somebody could send your consciousness into another person's body and be present in the meeting, but they're recording what's coming through the eyes, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's
And
half of my job.
right.
Spying, smuggling.
Better than remote viewing even,
Yeah.
right?
So
Oh, yeah.
what if they can't, this person, what if they can't use that person for whatever reason? Like he's not accessible to them, but you are because they've worked with you, they've groomed you, you're born into it, they have you, right? They can,
Right.
now you can, okay, they can pop your consciousness over just to even see. Like maybe it's all experimental to see if they can do it. Maybe they really are trying to gather data, like a double agent type of thing, or a spy or whatever, and vice versa. Maybe I don't know, but that's just the only thing that's kind of coming to my mind right now.
Well, that's the essence of what I'm doing. I'm spying, smuggling, etc. That's what I'm doing, basically spying. But I just wonder, is every time I'm in someone else's body, is that being directed?
Yeah, I
Because I
don't
don't
know.
always have that perception that it's being directed. A lot of times I do, but sometimes I don't. So that's just maybe a question to hang out there for
It
the
could,
audience. Maybe someone knows.
like you said, it could just be a byproduct of all
It
of
could be a
the.
byproduct. That's what I'm wondering, if it's a byproduct. And I don't want to say that for sure, but it's definitely on the table. Could this now, I'm spontaneously now doing this without their technology. I don't know. So I've had two crisis moments in the last 2 or 3 years. One of them was a spiritual crisis when I realized that the aliens could move my very essence and my soul and my consciousness from my body. I had a spiritual crisis because I just thought, this is not allowed. Where did my Bible tell me that the aliens can take me out of my body and have any authority whatsoever over me or over the afterlife or over, anything to do with my very essence, my soul, what makes me me? And now I understand that the humans are doing it as well. And so I'm devastated. I feel very betrayed. I had a really rough couple of weeks. It's like, man, the humans are doing this to me. And I want to say, this is not two different things. So this is not the so-called aliens and the so-called covert humans operating separately. This is a combined project. It is becoming very, very difficult for abductees to even separate now an alien abduction from a covert human abduction, because there is so much overlap. And these entities are working with humans side by side. We have a new whistleblower out in the community. He would also be phenomenal for your show, but he's not doing any visual representations right now because he's going to be in the new James Fox documentary. So I'll send you his information. Phenomenal. And so we have insiders coming out now. Now, I'm not as educated on a lot of the history and the lore of ufology, but we now have a very brand new whistleblower saying, I was in the program. These entities are working side by side with humans, period. There's no question. And so now, am I only taking his word? No, I'm going by my own experiences. I'm going what I've seen with my own eyes, despite the fact that they do have control over our perception. And I'm going with now the abduction research. going back decades is showing this very same thing. So I'm just devastated. I cannot believe human beings are using American citizens. And I think especially in the United States, we have this sense of entitlement, of freedom, of sovereignty over ourselves, over our bodies, over our spirit and soul. And so it was devastating for me. That's my walk down the Milabs. I think I've probably been going for quite some time. I don't know if hopefully you wrote down a couple questions or you put a couple into your head, because I've been talking for like 3 hours with no break. And I would say I hate to just go on a monologue, but yet here I am. And again, I don't even know where my notes are. I'm sure there's other stuff I wrote down from Penny, and it was just, it was insane.
Fringe, you never have to apologize for talking. All right. Like I tell all my guests this, the audience is here to hear you talk, first of all, and you especially feel free to talk the entire time. I don't care. Like, don't ever apologize. No. So this is mind blowing for so many different things. I was writing down many different names that you were mentioning. This whistleblower, let me ask you about this whistleblower. We'll work backwards here.
Okay.
The whistleblower, how do you know? Have you talked to him?
Oh, I'm telling you, Twitter is the best place you could possibly be for any of this type of topic. I mean, ufology, your community, first of all, there's so much overlap, right? When you came into the space that we did for UFO Twitter Week, the overlap on what you were saying about cryptids is insane. It
Really?
Sounds like the same exact process as an abduction from a so-called alien. Because by the way, these creatures, I mean, they're in our underground bases. They're side by side. Your Sasquatch is side by side with the Grace. It's all the same thing. And this is what people, we're separated and compartmentalized, and people don't understand. This is all the same thing. The satanic ritual abuse community, the targeted individual community, the cryptid community, the UFO community. Anyway, to answer your question, UFO Twitter, UFO X, we have whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork, jumping into spaces and vomiting information as much as they can give, because there's NDAs and there's classified information, and they're being very respectful of that. But this gentleman is God's gift to ufology right now.
Has he been
incredible?
Has there been you or whoever been successful attempts in vetting him at all, as far as him being? Because I mean, if he's a whistleblower, it means that I'm assuming. And maybe I'm wrong, but does he work within the government?
So he was in what is affectionately referred to as the program. And so the program is like a big umbrella, and I'm not going to be good at this part whatsoever, but the program is a big umbrella for a bunch of small umbrellas of programs such as UFO crash retrievals and recovery of bodies, anything from that to our own humans working side by side in labs with these entities. So there are different factions of the program, and a lot of these factions are actually compartmentalized away from each other. So the program is just a big umbrella, and he worked for the program, and he was, and this is, I don't want to mess up his story. He's an intelligence analyst, basically, and his job is to collect intelligence on the people who are working in the program. So did that answer your question? So yes, he's testified. I don't want to blow his story. He's testified before Congress. He is a certifiable whistleblower, a real one. And he did produce his DD-214. He has been vetted by people in the intelligence community. And yes, can you trust those people as far as you can throw them? Sometimes I think you can. You got to trust at least some stuff that they're saying. It's the 80-20 rule for me. Even when they're feeding us counterintelligence, you have to base counterintelligence on intelligence. Otherwise, it doesn't get swallowed, hook, line, and sinker. So he has been vetted. He has testified. He's in James Fox's new documentary. The man seems as legit as the day is long, and he's coming forward with an incredible story. He would be fantastic for your show. Matter of fact, you could probably hit him up and record as long as you don't release it until after the documentary is out, because he's definitely got some agreements, understandably so.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I kind of been coming to the same conclusion as well. And maybe I'm just gullible. Maybe I'm just this guy that, I don't know. But I mean, I didn't really know who this was when I met him. And so I don't know if I describe somebody that you know of and it's okay to say their name, then you can say it. But I recently met somebody who was one of the key movers inside the government on getting disclosure going. And I told him some of the things that was coming out back in 2017. I was like calling BS on. I was like, what is this? Like, I was thinking, I told him, I said, I felt like it was just a giant psyop going on. And, but after talking with him and hearing him speak and stuff, I was like, I think I understand now, and though you can't trust everybody on everything, some of the methodology used and the verbiage used, it made sense after hearing the explanation as to why things went down the way they did. So I totally agree with you on that aspect of things. Okay, so you speak with her name was, I wrote a couple of names. This was Penny, right? Penny was the 11, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was just like crazy to hear, because when you mentioned about being called 18, the first thing I thought of was, I was like, that's kind of like being called 11 from Stranger Things. And then you bring up Penny, and I was like, holy crap. So you're saying the creatures that you saw, have you ever watched Stranger Things?
Never.
Okay. You need to. It's my favorite show.
I don't want to watch Stranger Things.
No, here's the thing. Here's the thing. And you would know this more than anybody, but I tell people all the time, Stranger Things is real. It's based off of real events. Like they'll openly say that. But what I say is the intricate details of that show are real. And I've come to understand that through many different venues. You have just confirmed parts of it, like just reaffirmed it, So I had no idea about her, and you talked to her on the phone. Was it just one time that you talked to her?
It was one time. So I connected with her on Twitter. Again, the Twitter's the place to be, Tony. I'm telling you. I connected with her on Twitter. She gave me her phone number, and I went and bought a burner phone so I could contact her. I think we sent a couple of text messages. As a matter of fact, I might have sent her a text message once that said, hey, I think I ran a scenario by her, and she goes, oh, yeah, that's exactly what they do. Welcome to my world. And I just went, oh, man. So I definitely have a couple of connections to this whole Montauk project. I've never watched Stranger Things, but from what people have told me, some of my own personal experiences are depicted in Stranger Things. I mean, being in this dentist chair, I've been spun, and to get my astral body to go out of body, I have experienced this extreme spinning sensation in order to come out of body. So there's just been a few things that I think. Well, before we started recording, I told you yesterday I went through my journal and I ended up in tears. So I compartmentalize a lot of this stuff. People think when I speak that there's no emotion or, it's not affected me. Absolutely untrue. It's just compartmentalized. This is stuff that is so extremely traumatic that it's impossible to just deal with every single day. I can't just wake up every day and think the aliens can come snatch me out of my bed at any moment. And by the way, so can the military industrial complex. And by the way, they're working side by side, which is mind blowing to most people. I start reading through my journal, and there are times people ask me a question. There was one time somebody asked me, well, have the aliens ever told you that they're eating people? And I responded and I said, no, they haven't told me that. I was reading through my journal and I have it very specifically written down. I was told the aliens are eating people. Wow. And so I'll go through my journal and I've like compartmentalized it and put it away with just, maybe a dozen incidents that really stand out in my mind. Yesterday, I was reading through my journal And this is another thing that has come up. I have been inside a vat of liquid. Well, I didn't remember that until I went back and I looked through my journal. I went, oh my gosh, what was I doing in a vat of liquid? Well, that's throughout the abduction research. Little did I know. And so I know now. And so I just compartmentalize everything. And it's really not until I start trying to remember and talking and going through my journal that I realize the amount, I don't want to curse on your show, the amount of chicanery that has been happening to me for my entire life, and specifically since I started documenting it, is insane. I could make, I don't know, 10 or 12 movies out of it. And so we spoke earlier before we started recording, be really careful about writing down your dreams, because writing down your dreams can open up this connection between the right and left brain, and you suddenly have more access to your own subconscious, and you really might not want to know what's lurking there.